Today we have a comparison of two of the best TVs for gaming for 2022, the Samsung S95 QD-OLED TV and the LG G2 OLED TV. Hey guys, it's the Villaman here, home theater enthusiast and lover of all things tech. Let's compare some TVs. So these are two of the best OLED TVs and some of the best TVs you can get in general in 2022. And the LG has a good history of supporting basically all the important gaming features, but Samsung does as well. So these are both HDMI 2.1 compatible TVs, and they support all the adaptive sync technologies from VRR, G-Sync, FreeSync, the kitchen sink, you name it. But we're going to compare them today to examine their different performance characteristics as far as picture quality goes and any differences in performance. And before I even get into the video, a big shout out to Value Electronics and the folks over there who lent me the LG G2 so I could make this comparison as well as other comparisons that I've recorded so far. And if you're in the market for either one of these TVs, then I've left a link to their website where you can find either of these TVs and many others, as well as high-end audio equipment, because they have a great selection and they ship pretty fast. So definitely give them your support because they support content creators like myself so I can make videos for you. Now this will be a direct comparison of the TV's performance using my gaming PC, the Villa Consola, as well as the Xbox Series X and the PS5. So every aspect of gaming will be represented. And both TVs will be connected to each console using a Denon X4700H receiver, which then splits the signal to each TV. So each TV will be getting the exact same signal. So any differences you see will be a result of the TVs themselves. And if you like videos about home theater audio and video components, then make sure to subscribe because I have a lot more in the works. All right, without further ado, let's get into the comparison. Let's start things off with some good old-fashioned PC gaming. And what better game than my favorite game right now, Overwatch. Now both TVs are connected to the Villa Consola, which is my console-sized gaming PC. It's a mini ITX build and it has an 8-core Ryzen 5800X CPU and a GeForce RTX 3080 graphics card. It's also running 32 gigs of RAM and has a 2 terabyte NVMe, so it is really fast. And we have the output set to 4K HDR for both TVs at 120 Hz with G-Sync enabled because both TVs support G-Sync, which is NVIDIA's variable refresh rate technology. Now both TVs are in their respective game modes, and just off the bat from some casual observation we can see that they have a unique way of presenting their picture. The image on the G2 may seem a bit cooler than the one on the S95B, and that's because the OLED panel on the LG OLED uses a WRGB panel, which includes a white subpixel to help boost the brightness of the panel, the brightness output, while the Samsung TV does not need that and actually has the color filter removed and instead uses a quantum dot filter, and that helps it to achieve brightness capabilities even higher than that of the G2. That said, the brightness performance of each TV in this game is kind of contrary to what I'd expect, where the G2 actually seems brighter than the picture on the Samsung S95B. And that's both the specular highlights and the overall scene brightness. If you look at the darker areas of the screen, you can see that it's kind of lighter on the LG than it is on the Samsung. And that brings me to the next observation, where the colors on the Samsung are more saturated than they appear on the LG OLED. Colors throughout the spectrum just seem more vivid when looking at them on the QD OLED than they appear on the traditional LG OLED. I think the contrast performance on the Samsung is amplified so that the picture can have that much more of a pop than the one on the LG. So unsurprisingly, the gaming mode performance and the representation on the Samsung isn't quite as accurate as it could be, and not quite as accurate as LG's presentation. But besides that, because this game is such a fast-paced one, it benefits from a really responsive monitor, and both TVs do really well here. I see some slight tearing now and then on either TV with G-Sync enabled, but nothing that's egregious, nothing that is too pronounced. You have to be really looking for it to see it. But then this game wasn't really designed for HDR, so let's move on to an HDR game to see how that one performs. Now let's move on to the PS5 game Ghost of Tsushima, which is in itself a very good looking game with very vivid colors, some great HDR specular highlights, and just an overall diversity of color palette as well as brightness elements. And the first thing that jumps out at you is just how different the HDR presentation of both of these TVs are, where you can see where there's some great specular highlighting and just some HDR pop that's present on the Samsung S95B, which still exists on the LG G2, but isn't quite as impressive on that TV as it is on the QD OLED. The sunlight reflecting on the yellow leaves just has that great vibrancy and pop that one would expect from an HDR image, and that's the kind of image that the S95B presents, and which is what I expected coming into this comparison, but it wasn't present as much on the PC gaming side since that game wasn't really designed for HDR, but this one on the PS5 is, and this is the stark difference in HDR presentation that we see. In fact, the Samsung is so bright at times that the brightness detail exceeds what the camera can capture, so the brightness or the brighter part of the screen is clipped on the Samsung, which isn't quite the case on the G2, where the details and the highlights are more visible, but they are there on both TVs. Black level and shadow detail is also better on the Samsung S95B than it is on the LG G2, where there's more details in the darker areas on the QD OLED than there are on the WRGB OLED, which is contrary to what we saw on the PC gaming, essentially SDR gaming side. Also, the very saturated, almost cartoony color palette that was present in Overwatch isn't quite as present here, where the colors are more in line between both TVs. The Samsung has the more vibrant picture, but it isn't cartoony as a result. No, in fact, it's pretty balanced and leads to a very pleasing picture, actually. The PS5, unlike the Xbox Series X and PC, does not support AMD FreeSync, which is their technology for adaptive refresh rate syncing. Instead, it supports VRR, which is the HDMI 2.1 standard for adaptive refresh rate syncing, variable refresh rate, and as a result, both TVs are using VRR for their adaptive sync while playing PS5 games. And during the process of playing this game, I haven't noticed a single screen tear or slowdown. Now let's move on to a game on the Xbox Series X, and this is another fast-paced game in Forza Horizon 5. Now this is an over-the-top racing game with a lot of flashy colors, some vibrant contrast and saturated colors, as well as fast-moving objects as they pan across the screen and just fly by as you do upwards of 100 miles per hour. And for another HDR mastered game like the one on the PS5, we see some similar performance characteristics where the colors on the S95B are more vibrant and just more punchy, and the HDR presentation is not only brighter in the overall screen brightness, but also for the specular highlights, say in the clouds, on certain objects on the road, on the car, what have you. If we look on certain objects like the car, for example, as the sun shines on it, we can see the HDR specular highlights just having that much of a punchier impact on the S95B than it does on the G2. Now, the G2 is no slouch because it still provides a very good picture. And this is more so true in isolation. In a direct comparison like this, because the Samsung has the higher screen brightness and handles specular highlights that much better, then the G2 in comparison just seems a bit dull. But if you have just the G2 in your room, it would definitely perform well enough for you under those circumstances. Just not quite as well as the S95B. Even in the scenes where the sun reflects off the road, we can see where the S95B just handles those specular highlights better than the G2 and just has that better HDR rendition. And I think that's the biggest difference between these two TVs, the qualitative difference. They both perform very well quantitatively, so they have very minimal response time and input lag, but the qualitative difference is where they differ for the most part, where the S95B will have this more punchy HDR rendition than the G2 provides. They both provide support for pretty much all the gaming features you'd like, even up to 144 Hz refresh rate. The biggest difference you'll see between these two TVs is how they render that HDR image, and I think the S95B does a better job. So what do you think about the comparison? Let me know which TV you prefer in the comments, because they both have their own unique way of presenting content. So I'm interested to hear what you guys think in the comments. And the interesting fact is that this comparison is kind of an anomaly because I recorded the comparison before Samsung updated the firmware of their TV, which changed the performance characteristics, especially in movie mode. So colors aren't quite as vibrant as they once were, and a lot of people actually preferred that picture characteristics because it made HDR content just look more punchy and more vibrant. But I think one of the main concerns wasn't necessarily the punchiness of the picture, but the fact that Samsung was kind of disingenuous with how they presented it, because in instances where people would try to measure the TV would detect the patterns and then pretend like the picture was accurate, but that wasn't necessarily the case. So I think that's where one of the main concerns and main issues a lot of people have with the TV was, not necessarily the vibrancy and punchiness of the HDR presentation. Because if you wanted, say, accuracy in how your picture was presented for your movies or what have you, then you could always use the filmmaker mode, which was designed so that there would be a standard, accurate representation of content on TVs, no matter the brand. But you know, a manufacturer would certainly have the leeway to create their own interpretation, I guess, of the content based on their unique brand presentation, which I don't think anyone, myself included, have a problem with, or not many people. I can't speak for everyone. But yeah, that's happened since the release, and I think many people would want Samsung to go back to that way of presenting content. I think it would be the best of both worlds, because right now the movie mode is essentially very similar to the filmmaker mode, so it's lost its pizzazz. I don't use that word, but yeah, it's lost that. So let me know what you think. Do you prefer when the movie mode looked more vibrant and punchy, or do you prefer the current look of the movie mode, which basically resembles the filmmaker mode? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think, because the comparisons that I've recorded so far is with the old firmware, which had the punchy picture, which isn't necessarily the case anymore. And I'm not sure if people want to see that. I'm still debating whether I should release those comparisons or not, because, you know, I spent the time recording and everything, but I'm not sure if I should, or maybe I shouldn't. I'm not sure, but let me know in the comments if I should or what. But yeah, I'll be comparing the performance of the G2 as well, especially compared to the C2, to see if there's any benefit in the extra price for the G2. So definitely stick around for that and subscribe if you haven't as well, because those comparisons are yet to come. And of course, there are the QLEDs and mini LED TVs of the world, which also need to have their comparisons, right? I have a lot to do. But as far as this comparison goes, I personally preferred the picture of the S95B. It was vibrant, it was punchy, and the HDR highlights, the specular highlights, were very pronounced and impactful. So it gave you that really, really HDR look that, you know, a lot of us are looking for. The G2, of course, produced a vibrant and punchy picture as far as contrast goes, because it's still an OLED TV, but it wasn't quite as much so as the Samsung was. It was a more neutral picture on the G2, which some of you may prefer, but the HDR highlights just weren't quite as impactful. In isolation, either of these TVs would provide a great picture, absolutely so, but when compared them directly, we get to see the nuances of the performance, and so we can make a better decision. So I hope that helped. Let me know in the comments what you think, and don't forget to like the video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood Villa Man saying be safe and peace.